Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Does the microphone work? Thank you. I'm overwhelmed, actually, by this great room, this great campus, and the great population of Dante enthusiasts that showed up today. I hope I won't dampen your enthusiasm. Thank you, Luca, for inviting me. Thank you for hosting this event. Okay, 4:15. I have a lot to say because 3 case studies. We'll see if we can get through all of them. Let me start with the title and with one little point. Actually, the question mark in my title, Dante's Augustine. Oh, by the way, I've never figured out how to say Agostino in English. Augustine, Augustine, Augustine. So. Augustine. Thank you. That's my favorite. Okay, so Augustine. Dante's Augustine. Question mark. What do I mean by the question mark? I mean 2 or 3 things. The first one is Dante has a particular relation with Augustine, a peculiar relation with Augustine. And Augustine is not just one thing for Dante. He is different things at different times. In Dante's intellectual history, Dante approaches the reading of Augustine text at different moments with different agendas. And different books, different works are activated in Dante's mental library, and I think in Dante's real library. He accessed these books at different times for different purposes. When he was, I don't know, we'll see a few. When he was starting to think about his own life trajectory, the Confessions, where the book he went to. And when he was thinking about poetics, it was the De Doctrina Christiana, the book on Christian doctrine, that he reactivated, and so on. When he was thinking about politics, it was the City of God that he went to. So one way of asking what is Dante's Augustine is which Augustine, at what time did he access? There is a philological question connected to this, meaning, what were the libraries that Dante could access during his time of peregrination through Italy? Dante was a Florentine, but he was not a Florentine when he was writing his masterpieces. He was a person in exile. And he had been cast out of Florence and was wandering through northern Italy. And we don't know what libraries he had access to. We don't really know what kind of books were available to him. He didn't have a traveling library. Maybe he had a Bible. Maybe he had Virgil with him, but not much more than this. So there is a philological question that comes with this relationship. When, through which monasteries, through which libraries, through which codices did Dante access the works of Augustine? Why did he read Augustine as well? Then there is a last shade in that question mark that I would like to explore today. There may be a little irony associated to the presence of Augustine in Dante's work. Because Augustine was an intellectual giant for Dante's age, and he occupied the center field of theological discourse in his culture. And yet, in Dante's masterpiece, the Divine Comedy, Augustine comes in very late in the game, in Paradiso 32. So 1.5 cantos before the end, and he gets no walking or talking parts in the poem. We find him in a very distinguished company, of course, Francis and Benedict, as founders of orders, I think, in the celestial rose in heaven. But he's one word away from e altri, so and others. He's almost an et cetera in Dante's poem. How is this possible? How is... it's almost inconceivable that Dante makes Augustine such a minor figure in his poem. There are few explanations for this. Few possible hypotheses, working hypotheses. One, did he forget? Did he forget about Augustine? Tough to say. I mean, tough to argue that this was the case. Dante can avoid confronting Augustine, maybe, but he cannot forget about him. The status of the presence of Augustine in the poem could be the same as, I don't know, pride in hell. Are you reading the Divine Comedy, by the way? I mean, can I assume that you are sort of vaguely familiar with the text? Yes? Vaguely familiar? Okay. Where is pride as a sin in Inferno? Nowhere. It's nowhere to be found. Okay? There's no specific circle in hell devoted to pride. But then if you start thinking about the big characters in hell, you see that all of them have in their personality, there is one aspect that makes them prideful. So pride is nowhere and everywhere. Augustine is similar in a way. The teachings of Augustine are at the same time nowhere specifically addressed and everywhere pervasive through the poem. There's another explanation that has been put forward, which has some value to it. Dante had a bone to pick with Augustine. He had a problem with Augustine. And the problem was Rome. Dante was a classicist, decided to be a classicist early on in his life. His poem starts in an incredibly classical way. Who knows the first line of the Divine Comedy by heart in Italian? Come on. I have my students memorize it, and I'm teaching a class in English. So, loud, please. Nel mezzo, there you go. That's the 2 words. It's enough. Thank you. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, midway. So when a poem starts with the words nel mezzo, it says 2 things. First, it says, I'm not the Bible, because the Bible starts with in the beginning, right? And he says in the middle. 2, he says another thing. I'm not the Bible, but I am an epic poem. Epic poems from classical times start in medias res, in the middle of the action, in the midst of the action. So Dante squarely says at the beginning, this is going to be a classicizing poem. Deal with it. It's a Christian poem that has right away a pagan character walking in, which is Virgil. And so Dante has sworn allegiance to an idea of Rome, which for him is a cultural idea and a cultural ideal, and it's a political idea. He's aligning himself with the emperor and with the imperial power in his days, and the emperors of his days were claiming direct investment from Roman times. Okay. Augustine wasn't really happy about Rome, as you may know, having read The City of God. Rome was the anti-city, was the earthly city, the city that Jerusalem had transcended. And so whenever the talk was Rome, Dante and Augustine could not see eye to eye. So some have said this political, ideological divide moved Augustine to the sides. Fair enough. I think there's a third possibility, and this is the possibility that I'm trying to explore with you today. Another reason why Augustine's presence was to be made diffused throughout the poem. And it has to do with what Augustine taught Dante about reading and writing literature. His lesson on poetics and hermeneutics, in other words. What did Dante learn from Augustine about the task of the writer? And this is really the core of my talk. In order to explore this, I'll look at 3 case studies. The first one is under the rubric of instruction and example. Context for this. I will run through many of these slides. I'm trying to save trees, so I didn't make a handout. So please follow them in the language of your choice. This is the first time, in the context, and you will see coming in a moment, this is going to be the first time that Dante mentions Augustine. In the context of what? This is the beginning, the opening gambit of his treatise on, I don't know, philosophy. Dante is writing a book which is called Convivio, the banquet of knowledge, and it's going to be a massive book. Dante is imagining he's going to write 14 treatises on, based on the explanation of 14 canzoni, so great songs that he had written, and that he's going to comment upon. In these, it's really an ambitious work. It's the first attempt to do philosophy, high-power philosophy in the vernacular. Philosophy was a discipline taught and thought through in Latin. The Italian vernacular didn't have yet, says Dante, the vocabulary to speak, to articulate philosophical truth. And it's a project that's based on self-commentary. And a project, such a project needs to vindicate the authority of the author. The author needs to be, foregrounded, and he is the one who's going to tell you things as they are. Now, in order to do so, he has to talk about himself. But there is a problem. Good manners, rhetorical good manners, don't allow people to talk about themselves openly. There are only two reasons for which you can, and one is a defensive reason. If someone has attacked you and you need to defend yourself, no one steps forward and says, this guy is a good guy. And you have to say, look, I am a good guy. And that is the model of Boëtius. And Dante makes it very clear that he has something of that. This is a book he writes in exile. People are slandering him. People in Florence don't want him to be back. And there is a rumor that he betrayed his party, he betrayed his country, and so on. And he said, I cannot have this said about me, so I have to step up and defend myself. The other reason for which you are allowed to talk about yourself is when you are going to say something that no one else could in your place. The language that is being used is really technical. Ne diede esemplo en dottrina. This is Augustine's model. He gave us an example and doctrina, instruction, which could not be provided by any other testimony so true as his. So, the reason for speaking of yourself is communicating, sharing some knowledge, giving doctrine. Now, there are two interesting things about this passage. The first one is one that goes back to Pavia, actually. Both Augustine and Boëtius are entombed in the same place, in Pavia. So the fact that they come up together at the beginning of this work, which has been written in exile, may be an indication that Dante is thinking along very territorial terms. And he is thinking about, let's say, the city of Pavia in the background of his mind. Not only that, it's not just the city that is important. He's thinking also about a transmission of knowledge through time and space. And he talks about that in very technical and very language-based terms. That is one of the few intellectuals in the Middle Ages who really think and reflect about the vernacular, the language that we speak. And the language that we speak, as you know, and you know it by talking to your parents, and your parents don't understand what you're saying because they're from a different generation, vernacular language changes. Not the language that you find in books, not the language that is stabilized, but your lingo, your slang, the words that really matter for you, they do change from generation to generation. And Dante has, about the vernacular, writes this passage, pushing the argument to the extreme. If people were to come back after 1,000 years, they would think that their towns have been occupied by foreigners. So big is the gap. once again, Pavia is in the back of his mind. I'm shuttling back and forth two works that he was writing at the same time, The Banquet and the Treatise on Vernacular Eloquence, or Vernacular Poetry, the treatise in Latin that he was composing at the same time. The composition is really interconnected here. So when he repeats the same argument in the other book, in the Latin book, he says, he brings Pavia back to the front of the discourse. I make so bold as to declare that if the ancient citizens of Pavia were to rise from the grave, they would speak a language distinct and different from that of the Pavians or Papians of today. From that, and this is the last movement in my first argument, this is not just a problem that Dante sees in Italy for the present, for his present purposes. He sees this problem as a wide cultural problem, a long-lasting cultural problem. The mutability of language, which is, as we all know, having read a little bit of the Bible, a question of sin, and the multiplication of languages and the instability of languages come from Babel, basically, from the Tower of Babel. He says that intellectuals have tried to remedy this. How? They invented Latin. They invented a language that's stable in time. He got Romance philology all wrong. He thought that Latin was derived from Italian, Spanish, French, and basically Catalan. He got it all wrong. He thought that this was an Esperanto. You know what Esperanto is? So an artificial language that intellectuals have devised in order to speak to one another across borders and speak to one another across time. What is at stake in trans-spatial and trans-time communication? Content. That is what Dante is all about right now. He wants to imagine his work as an intellectual, as someone who transfers content. I have an idea in my mind. You don't have that idea in you yet. I'm going to encode it in language and pass it on. You decode it, you get the idea, perfect. Okay? As you can see, Augustine's model is the model that he is thinking here. At the center, at the core of his identity as an intellectual who deals with the great concepts of philosophy, what is nobility, what is appropriate action, all these great notions that are based, on which you base your life, are content notions for him. He's going to teach you something, he's going to give you doctrine, and Augustine is his model there. Okay? So the entombment is there as a first step in a resurrection. So far, so good? Good. Let's move into more spirabilaere, so in a better environment. We move away from prose, thank goodness, and thick philosophical arguments that Dante is trying. Dante, for a moment, thought of himself as a prose writer. Can you imagine that? And then something happened. And then something happened, and he started writing the Divine Comedy. Now, the Divine Comedy has many moments of Augustinian, let's say, brush with celebrity. Many moments in which the Augustinian model comes in a subtle way. The model that is being, I think, articulated throughout the comedy has to do with how to read books. First, what's the first great scene of reading a book in the Divine Comedy? Help me out. What's the greatest scene of reading a book in the Divine Comedy? Help me from the floor. Paolo and Francesca. Who said Paolo and Francesca? 100 points. Thank you. Yes, Paolo and Francesca, and they're reading a book. What do we know about this situation? I'm going to dispense with the poetry for a second. The temptation is to read, but I'm running through many things. I won't read. This is the first character. There are few first in this episode in the poem. This is first reading scene. Okay. This is the first character in the poem with whom Dante had first sinner in the poem with whom Dante has an extended dialogue. And this is the first character who gives her life story, gives her confession. And there are many confessional moments in that canto. Canto 5 is the one in which also Minos, the great judge of hell, is portrayed, and all the souls in Dante's imaginary world go to Minos and confess in front of him, and he says, hey, okay, you are destined to this circle, you are destined to this punishment or to the other one, okay? So there are many confessional elements, but there is a confessional element very important here as well. What's the situation? This is the time in which Francesca tells us how she fell in love, or better yet, how she and Paolo, her lover, discovered that they were harboring tender feelings for one another. How did they do that? Well, they were reading. They were reading a chivalric novel, the story of Lancelot and Guinevere, from the cycle of the Arthurian cycle, King Arthur and Court of Camelot and so on. What do they find in the book? They find a kissing scene at a court, and the two lovers are very noble, very knightly, very refined characters. They like what they see, and they do the same, because they feel they are also at the court, which they are. Well, Francesca is the boss's wife, by the way, and Paolo is the boss's brother. But here it's not that. Does not factor in. He's the proud knight, and so they see a kiss in the text, and they replicate the kiss. And line 138. That day we read in it no further. Why? What does it mean that they read in it no further? Well, it can mean two things. First, on the level of the plot, they didn't need to read anymore. The seduction scene had taken place. They knew they were, ready to become lovers. So the book doesn't matter, and they move on to smooching. I don't know, kissing. So they didn't need the book any further. Okay, fair enough. The fact that they read no further is also a little bit an ethical problem, because had they read further, they would have seen that from that kiss that Lancelot and Guinevere had exchanged, the end of all Camelot, the end of the kingdom, the end of the peace, the end of the Arthurian romance world was to come about. That kiss was the spark that brought down a whole wonderful chivalric system. So they read no further because they didn't want to read a cautionary tale that came with that story. They were so enthralled that they stopped at the part that suited them. So far, I think this is a pretty good double explanation. I think there's a triple explanation here. There's another little hint. There is another case, another wonderful scene about reading a book in which someone stopped reading and didn't need to read further. This is Augustine's scene of his conversion in the garden in Milan. When he hears a summoning, a mysterious summoning of a voice that says, "Tolle leget," pick up and read, pick up the book and read. And he understands this message as an invitation to get the book that he was reading, pick it up, read again, and see what the book had to tell him, could tell him. He does so, and he opens the book and reads something that he feels, that he knows, that applies to him specifically, personally, individually. And guess what? No further would I read, nor needed I. I was converted. How? This is the Latin, by the way. Why was it possible for Augustine to feel that book, that passage on which he stumbled upon, applied to himself so well? Well, because, and this is a little part that I had extracted from the previous quotation, because he had heard of Antony. who had converted exactly based on the same dynamics. He had heard the gospel being preached, and he had taken that message as referring to himself. This is Francesca's model, by the way. Or better yet, Francesca's model is a perversion of this model that Dante's text stops and signals as a pertinent antecedent. The reading situation in Augustine and in Dante's text is an exercise in introspection by way of a book, a self-diagnosing moment triggered by the reading of a text. Okay? Now, all texts have a very curious habit of, when we lean forward in reading them, to send us back one image. And that image is mostly that of ourselves as readers. Books tell us tells us what we are, actually. But they tell us what we are in the way we read them, in the way we approach them. Augustine read the book, saw something that applied to himself in the book, and he didn't like what he saw. So he turned away from it. He converted. He turned away from that image. He discounted it. He said, that's not what I am this, but I don't want to be this. Paolo and Francesca read the book, saw something in the book. They saw themselves in the book. They liked it, and they went for it, no matter the consequences. Okay. Third case. Is it the third case? Yes, lost in translation. So we have seen two models thus far of Augustinian teaching active in the way Dante thinks of himself as a writer and tries to teach us how to read his book and not just his book. Okay? As a writer, convivio. As a reader, now. There is a third level in which Augustinian thinking is extremely important for Dante when he thinks about translation. Not just translation moving one text from one language to the next, but as cultural translation. What happens when we move from a culture that accepts is built upon a certain kind of parameters, and we move to a different culture in which the parameters are new, are better, hopefully better. Purgatorio 30. I've been teaching the Divine Comedy for a long time, and I have developed some sort of emotional immunity to it. It comes with teaching over and over again, the same passages, and the beauty doesn't wear off, but the emotion wears a little off with time. This one is still one of the most moving moments in the whole poem. So if you hear my voice break, it's because I didn't eat a fly. It's just that this passage moves me. There are a couple more in the whole poem, but this still moves me. What is this moment? This is the moment in which Dante bids farewell to Virgil. Virgil has been his guide for 2/3 of the poem. He has guided him through hell and through purgatory. And now they are in Eden. Dante imagines that at the top of Mount Purgatory that there is Eden. Dante is great at making up stuff. And this is making up stuff that in a way he presents as assertive theology. So he imagines that they have reached Eden, and in Eden a change of the guard is going to happen. It's going to take place. Because we know that from the beginning, Virgil has told Dante, look, I was a pagan. God doesn't want me in his heaven. So someone better than me is going to come and lead you through the last stretch of your journey. This is the moment in which this happens. Virgil is disappearing here, and Beatrice is coming. And Beatrice is coming in the most glorious way. Beatrice is Dante's high school sweetheart that Dante casts as his personal Christ. And this is, I mean, it's a huge, theologically almost impossible proposition that we have to accept if we read Dante. Don't believe into it, just accept it for the sake of the game and the game of this poem. And Dante presents this as a game. When my students ask me, but do you believe in this? I said, no, I don't believe in this. I play bridge. I play, but I don't believe in the rules of bridge. But I know the rules of bridge. I know the rules of poker, actually. That's my example. So I don't believe in them, but I play by those rules. So this is the rule that we have to accept here. The angels that accompany Beatrice while she's coming down to greet Dante, and as you can see, scold him, are singing one song, and the song is Benedictus qui venis. Blessed are you in the masculine, Benedictus, who are coming in the name of the Lord. I mean, and this is Beatrice coming. So Beatrice is an androgynous, Christ-like figure for Dante, who's going to come down and scold him. Scold him for what exactly? Well, the scene that let's try to decode the scene, to look at the scene closer. Dante sees that Beatrice is approaching and feels something. And he's about to say something, not to Beatrice, not to us, but to Virgil. And so he turns around and poof, Virgil is gone. The text of the comedy insists on one element. What jumps at you from this passage? What do you see here that's so strongly rhetorical? Can you see anything? Luca, help me out.
Virgilio is repeated.
3 times. Virgilio, 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 3 times. Ma Virgilio non aveva lasciati semi di sé. Virgilio, dolcissimo padre, Virgilio, a cui per mia salute diemi. Very moving. Okay? He's calling Virgil in the text. He's calling Virgil in the text. Okay? He's evoking him at the moment of his loss. Okay? Beatrice responds to that with a very, very sharp argument. Perché Virgilio se ne vada, non piangere ancora, che pianger ti conviene per altra spada. Don't weep for this. Don't weep now. There's something else. There's something else. There's some other sword that will cut you, and for that you should cry. And Beatrice will, in the rest of the canto, go on to explain, to tell Dante all the reasons why he had to cry for real, that he had abandoned her, that he had devoted himself to futile pursuits, that he had chosen a branch of philosophy that had dispensed with God, many things that are coming up. But that's not the part I'm interested in. I'm interested in this part here, the threefold repetition and what Dante was going to say to Virgil. If you are a classically trained reader and you see this, someone who's walking forward, then turns around and the person who's behind disappears, what do you see? What myth is this? Let's try to read mythologically. Yes?
Orpheus and Eurydice.
Thank you. Orpheus and Eurydice, beautiful. You know the story of Orpheus and Eurydice? Orpheus was a great, great poet, so strong. I mean, his poetry was so strong that he could move mountains. Okay, he moved all the animals to be tamed. Okay, Orpheus got married, but due to an untimely death, his wife Eurydice dies, and he is so devastated that he goes to the underworld, sings so powerfully that he obtains Eurydice's life, and the king of the dark world allows him to bring her out as long as he doesn't turn around. But then while they're going up, he turns around, poof, and she disappears. Now, can you map the myth on the situation? Well, there is something there, okay? The interesting thing, I don't want to dwell on this, I want you to do the math in your mind, is the interesting thing of when you try to map the myth with this moment in the poem, you'll see that there are many things that don't really work. Okay, who's Dante? Who's Orpheus? Is it Dante? And then Virgil must be Eurydice. But then if you think about it, Dante is alive and Beatrice is dead. And so he's going to meet Beatrice, but he's not going to rescue Beatrice. It's Beatrice who's going to rescue him, and so on. Okay? So there's something off in this scene, which I think is one of those contradictions on which the text of the comedy thrives. He puts us as readers in an awkward position. We see something, we say, oh, I got it. He's a poet, he's doing, Orpheus myth here. And then we try it, and it doesn't work. And we should reflect why it doesn't work. Have you played Dante's Inferno, the game, the video game? No, I'm sorry. I'm going off on a tangent here, but this is the time in which you need to jolt your audience. Seriously, have you played the game? No? Boy, they get old so fast, these video games. Okay, the basic premise of that, no, it's pertinent. The basic premise of that game is that Dante is a great soldier, a crusader, who is going through hell, actually, to save Beatrice, whose soul has been captured by Satan, okay? Okay, there's nothing more wrong that could be, nothing worse can be done to the text of this poem, which is an incredibly revolutionary text in which it has a woman go and save a schmuck, okay, a man. Okay, so our culture has done an incredibly terrible disservice to the poem by developing a game that has reversed the roles. Okay, because Dante had inverted the roles here. The gender roles here have been, made to explode. Okay. Oh, yes. But the context of the myth is pertinent because if we read one of Dante's sources, the Virgil, from the Georgics here, a passage not on from the Aeneid, but from his more learned pre-Aeneid work, he tells the myth. This is the part of the story at the end of Orpheus' life. Orpheus dies too, but he dies because a pack of frenzied women who despise him for his anti-marital songs. He doesn't believe in marriage once Eurydice is dead, and so sings against the institute of marriage, the love of women, actually. They go to him and just tear him apart, limb by limb. The wonderful, elegiac moment that issues from that is the one that Virgil here captures, and I'm interested in the last lines. His head severed, still called Eurydice, wretched Eurydice, and the river banks were replying, echoing Eurydice all along. Threefold repetition here. It could be that this is a good antecedent. Let's get to the second element that I want to draw your attention to. There's not just Eurydice in this canto as big figures, female figures, there is also Dido. Do you know Dido? Not the singer. Dido, the heroine, actually, I was going to say the hero, because Dido is gendered masculine for a couple of times in Virgil's Aeneid. She's such a strongly willed woman that she is gendered as called the dux, so the leader in the masculine in Virgil's poem. Dante has said, I was turning around to say to Virgil, conosco I segni dell'antica fiamma. And this is a line that he has lifted from Virgil's Aeneid, from the moment in which Dido is about to acknowledge that she was a widow and she had pledged to remain univira, which is to say single for the rest of his life, a woman of just one man, univira. But she is falling in love with Aeneas, with the Trojan outcast who has just landed on her shores. And she says to her sister, she confesses to her that agnosco veteris vestigia flamme. So I know the traces, vestigia is a kind of a complicated word. The traces, the scars, the vestige, the footprints, even the footprints of the ancient flame. Now, what does this, I mean, and you know how the story ends, right? She falls in love with Aeneas. Aeneas at a certain point gets a call from Jupiter. Jupiter tells him, you don't have to stay in Carthage. You have to go to Italy and found Rome. Go. And he goes, picks up and leaves. And Dido is devastated, not only because she is a woman who has been abandoned, she's also a queen who has been betrayed by an ally and kills herself. So that's not the kind of the flame of love here that's evoked in this passage. It's not really the kind of love that Dante would like to project, I think, on Beatrice's love for him and on his love for her. Okay? So there's something, once again, that's odd in this passage. Augustine comes into play as well, here as well. Why? Because Augustine had, in turn, attacked Virgil on Dido, precisely on the comédie larmoyante that was developing between Aeneas and Dido, on the little domestic tragedy that was at stake. And Augustine had used, in a famous passage in the Confessions, had used a significant phrasing. He talks about his fascination with the book, and all he wanted to do was to read the Aeneid, and all he wanted to read in the Aeneid was the Dido episode. Why? Because it made him cry. And he says that was stupid. That was absolutely the wrong thing to do. For what more miserable than a miserable being who commiserates not himself, weeping at the death of Dido for love to Aeneas, but weeping not his own death for want of love to thee, O God. Why is this passage pertinent? Two reasons. Look at Latin. Miserius, misero, non miserante. This is piangere. This is the threefold repetition of piangere, of weeping, that was triggered in Dante's text. Not only that, but also the death of Dido, there we go, that is described in the same passage in the Confessions, is markedly death by steel. And that may be a reasonably appropriate gloss for Beatrice's altra spada, the other sword for which Dante should be crying. What is Beatrice saying, using Augustine here as a background, as a resonating chamber for what, culturally resonating chamber for what she's saying? She's telling Dante in the text, well, you're crying here, you're weeping now, your little tragedy, you're making a little tragedy out of a situation that's only a surrogate of the real tragedy in which you really are. You have parted from God. The fact that Virgil is leaving is nothing. That's just a little play inside this plot. That your real drama is your aversion from God. You are in the region of unlikeness, my dear. Don't just read books to pass the time, okay? Don't invest the story, the literary little story that's happening to you with epistemological, that's a big word, ethical, okay, with ethical and knowledge-bearing value, okay? Good. So, how could Dante import this line into his own poem? Is this moment in which the character of Dante says, conosco I segni dell'antica fiamma, one of the reasons why Beatrice is right in attacking him? Well, yes, absolutely, that is true. But there is a little venom embedded in that line. Did you remember? Well, let me flip back. Let me flip back a couple of lines here, a couple of slides here. What does Virgil line? How does Virgil line read? reads well. It scans very well. But what does it say? Agnosco veteris vestigia, flamme, vestigia, vestigium. Traces, scars, vestiges, footprints. Dante doesn't say vestigia. He says segni, signs. Now, signs and vestiges are not the same thing. Why? How can I be so sure? How can I be so self-assured? Well, because I am at an Augustinian institution, and Augustine has a wonderful, incredibly smart description and discussion of signs in his On Christian Doctrine. And he says there are two kinds of signs: natural signs and signs that are conventional. And the natural signs are, well, you can see, smoke coming from fire, a footprint, a vestigium, okay? What's so peculiar about them? They don't want to mean anything. They indicate something, but there's no intention there. And there's no decoding that should go, that goes into them, okay? There is absolutely no decoding. There are signs that mean only one thing, okay? And they mean the thing that is absent. But this is another story. Now, the signs instead, so these are vestiges. When Dante says segni rather than vestigia, he's pointing to this other category of signs. Which one? The one of deliberately posed and deliberately constructed signs. Signs that want to say something, that have an intention with them, and that trigger, they need to trigger in us, as the receiver of those signs, a process of, the big word is hermeneutics, a process of interpretation. How do we interpret these signs? These are the signs that Augustine wants to talk about, by the way. Why? Because the Bible, the Holy Writ, have been written with those signs. And these signs are human. They are man-made. They are human, so they are the expression of the embodiment of the intention of humans. And for Augustine, this is very important when you apply this notion to the Bible, because you can articulate there the double authorship of the Bible. The Bible has a human hand that is drafting the text, and you have God's hand that is moving that human hand, and there are so two related, two interconnected levels of message. One that is fully human and inspired, though inspired, and the other one that is divine. How do we get through one to the other? Well, through interpretation, through hermeneutics. Okay. Signa. Why is Dante calling upon a discussion, Augustine's discussion of signs here, while talking about the moment in which he leaves, Virgil leaves him? This is the most difficult part, but it's the last twist, the last crazy twist in my talk. It's the most difficult part to articulate. In the same argument, in the same book, and along the same lines that Augustine had set up while talking about signs, conventional and natural signs, he had also included in that book and in that context a review of classical knowledge as it could be used and as it should be used by Christian believers and Christian, actually, intellectuals. Okay? And had done so by using the cultural metaphor or the allegory, but I prefer cultural metaphor here, of the gold of the Egyptians. Sorry, this is the Latin. And he had said, well, we have, the relationship between Christian knowledge and pagan knowledge is the same that was set up in the Bible when the chosen people was invested with the task of removing gold, of despoliating Egypt, removing gold from Egypt and put it to a better use. And Augustine insists on the fact that this has happened in the church's cultural history, that indeed the fathers had taken up the gold of the Egyptians, had taken up what was useful in pagan thinking, in pagan thought, and put it to a better use, and enriched and built upon it and enriched the Christian culture. And this was done by Augustine by insisting, this is my last slide, on the fruitful, inexhaustible quality of the meaning that is entrusted to the Bible. This is the last statement at the end of his long discussion of what could we as Christians take from those pagans and use it. And as you can see, quod sine prejudicio alterius, and I say this without prejudice to any other interpretation that may be as good or better. So he's describing the politics of cultural supersession that are taking place in his Christian environment, and he's using to foreground them and to base them, he's using the biblical interpretation, a moment in biblical interpretation. Now, what I think that Dante is doing here by mobilitating all these texts, I think that he is seizing on Augustine's more classical friendly attitude as was expressed in the Doctrina Christiana and pitting it against his more stern attitude as was expressed in the Confessions. And I think while he's doing this, he's insisting that all signs are endlessly interpretable. Those of love, but also those of literature and of scripture itself. And he reminded everybody, himself, his Augustinian readers, and respectfully, I think he's reminding Augustine himself that all texts in the hands of the reader who is searching for God's truth are useful. They do move you out of Egypt. They are all a seed for the new life, for a really new life. And I say this as, Augustine says, without prejudice to any other interpretation that may be as good or better. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions. And thank you. Beautiful lecture.
Hit me, yes.
Thank you for a very intellectually challenging presentation. But how did you what was the impetus for you embarking upon this very difficult journey of exploration? You have gone into the deep mines and dug things out and put them together in a way that seems very, very non-obvious. How did you begin this journey and why?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. I wasn't happy. That's a good start. Well, I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with what? I wasn't happy with a political resolution of the Dante Augustine question. For me, I have practiced that, I've researched that area too, and I I'm guilty of having said things like, Dante was at odds with Augustine on Rome, and it's more complicated than that. I realized that for Dante and Augustine to, let's say, try and do justice to their relation, to the complexity of their relation, I should find a middle ground, and I find that middle ground on science, the signa, that discussion, their mutual interest in how culture works and how it can be, how we should make it work was essential. So unhappiness and reliance on science. That's an Augustinian, first step, I think. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
I was thinking about the saints that you did listed that he encounters in Paradise, or in Paradiso.
Yes.
Paradiso. Francis, Benedict, and then Augustine. Do you think that Dante was expressing like an Italian identity there, picking all Italian saints?
So marginalizing Dominic. Cool. I have not thought about that. Go home, write it, and publish it. I like it. I like it, yes. It's very territorial. Dante is incredibly territorial. I don't think he has a bone to pick with Benedict. I think if he has a problem with a nationality, or let's say not a nationality, but with the politics of one country is France, not Spain. He's okay with Spain. He is worried by France because France is developing into a national monarchy at that time, and Dante wants nothing of that. He's a staunch imperialist, and the threat. Well, and French had another little thing that was doing at the same time, had captured, the papacy. He was in Avignon at that point, so that too was kind of not sitting well with Dante. Yes, yeah. 3 writers of a regola, I think, are in that passage. They're also writers, composers of something that is rooted in language and gets into the translation mode as well, okay? Yes. Was that a question? I said it. That was another question. Yes, no, it's a phone.
You were answering there.
I don't know. Was there a question on that side? No? Okay. I'm here for you.
Well, if I understood correctly, because I don't hear too well, did you say at a certain point that we do not know what Dante read, his book he had, and so on? He studied with Franciscan
Yes,
monks,
indeed.
who at that time were the conservatory of all the knowledge.
Absolutely.
He went to Bologna University, the oldest university in the world, at least twice.
Mm-hmm.
We know he read the Boetius, Virgil, obviously.
Of course.
And Cicero. And
Yes. Indeed. But I'm talking, yes, in the cultural formation of Dante, Florentine years, formative years, yes, we have a decent sense. Once again, I'm guilty of having found the manuscript from which he read Cicero's De Officiis. So I've done that kind of research, and I believe that for a certain slice of his life, it's possible to say. Things get a little more complicated when we are talking about exile. And the years in which he is composing both the Convivio and the De Vulgari, but most of all he's composing the Commedia. We really don't know. Paradiso, we have a certain sense of where he was, but not for the inception of the poem. The inception of the poem is in a biographical vacuum. We are not really sure. Even the question of Pavia is very tentative. I mean, Pier Vincenzo Mengaldo, who was one of the great personalities in Dante studies from last century, in his entry in the Encyclopedia Dantesca about Pavia, he cites the text that I've shown, and he said that was just a random city he picked. Well, he's a very good philologist. He was a very good philologist, and he meant, he meant we don't have any documentary evidence to substantiate the claim that he was in Pavia at any moment. That's what he meant, but he's kind of dismissive. I want to resurrect that idea. I think Pavia is very much in Dante's mind while he's writing these things. But I don't know, was he, admitted to the library of the Augustinians there? Was a layman, not really powerful in any way. Was respected, but yes.
He was a guest of some
Yes,
courts
absolutely.
who were at the
Yes.
forefront of knowledge in those days, like
Yes.
Andrande della Scala,
Indeed.
like Fiorello in Rimini.
Absolutely.
And so quite likely those people had some libraries.
Absolutely. The point I'm trying to make is that while we have a very good, once again, thanks to the Augustinians, a very good sense of what Boccaccio's library was, because he donated his library to Santo Spirito in Florence, and there's a catalog of those books, and we have found some of those books. We don't have the catalog of Cangandre's library yet. Maybe one day, if we dig, we find. But we haven't had it yet. We haven't found it yet. So we can surmise. And I'm all in favor of surmising. I'm all in favor of building a hermeneutic, argument that then reflects on philology. But I have to state first my doubts for my own argument, okay? For my own argument. Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed. So, you have one question. I had a question for the audience, but that's okay. Yeah.
Can we talk about the relationship between Augustine and Dante and Augustine as what Bloom would call the anxiety of influence?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Indeed. Indeed, there is some. Okay. It's huge. Bloom, you know Bloom, Harold Bloom, Anxiety of Influence, great book with a terrible part on Dante. So read the whole book. It's incredibly important to read Western literature, especially the Romantic age. Skip the part about Dante and Virgil because it doesn't work. Try it, but it doesn't work. Now, anxiety of influence. Yes. The main engine behind at the roots of anxiety of influence is the sense that we as writers, as people of culture, have come too late, when everything that was worth saying has been said. And so we have to negotiate this overburdening past in order to articulate what we want to say, possibly something new. Well, Dante wasn't really interested in something new, well, or maybe he was, in something that could have an impact on us. And he finds that basically everything and anything he wanted to say had been said by Augustine. It's tough to navigate your way around such an intellectual giant, really. And Augustine was everywhere in Dante's culture. There's more Augustine in Thomas Aquinas than there is in Augustine himself. And Dante has read, really, I haven't counted, but I think a count would, a word count would tell us that, there is more in Aquinas. And Dante is not on good terms with Aquinas either. Why? Because Aquinas had classed poetry as the lowest of all sciences. And he was right. And Aquinas was right. Poetry is not a science. But Dante has something else to say. He's saying, well, but all the sciences won't make you a better human being. They won't make you a better human being. The underlying discourse that I was trying here, and I'm going to bring that out, 3 movements. The first is teaching something. The second is reading for pleasure. And the third one is moving. These are the 3 goals of rhetoric according to the old ancient masters, one of which is Augustine. First is docere, I teach you something. That's the first level. Second one, I'm going to let you pass, half an hour of a pleasant time, and that is Paolo and Francesco, but that is delectare. That's another goal of rhetoric. You should be an accomplished speaker because you should entertain people. But these 2 are worth nothing unless what I say changes you. Unless I move you to action. Thus Dante was, this was his reason for writing. period, full stop. I mean, that was his reason for writing. In the Epistle to Cangrande, he says as much. He has a little cover letter to his poem when he sends it to Cangrande, to one of his patrons, and he says, the whole point of this enterprise is action. It's filled with stuff about speculations, filled with ideas, but those ideas only serve the purpose of action. Okay? And he got this from Augustine. But he had to articulate it in a different way. Damn complicated question. That was a complicated question. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a little more about the relationship of reading and kind of acting upon what you read,
Right.
and free will, which is something that comes up with Paolo Francesca, right? Because like the argument that Dante is making there is that it's not because you fall in love that you
Right.
have to act upon it. You still have your free will, you can make a choice.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes,
And
yes,
this
yes.
idea that was also popular at Dante's time, that you are what you read in a way, because like they have also like a very physical way of reading that was better
Yes.
compared to eating. So kind of like you're eating the words, you count the words.
Right. You
Whereas
digest.
free will comes
You digest the words, yes, indeed. Okay, wonderful question. Thank you. Huge. Two things. One, line 137. Who's at fault if Francesca and Paolo fell in love? The book, of course. It is the book. She says it is the book. Well, she has spent the whole canto telling us that it wasn't her fault. Love made her do it. Love made her fall in love. She was a gentle soul, and that gentle soul has to love once, and someone who's loved needs to love back, and so all this craziness. But here she's shifting very clearly the blame on the book, basically really basing her quote unquote syllogism, her reasoning, on the notion that you are what you read, that such is the enthrallment of the text that you are forced to do what the text asks you to do. It's tough for me to swear, but this is a moment for which one should swear. This is not a reasonable argument. This is not a convincing argument, okay? And you're hearing what I'm saying. She is exactly, thank you. Thank you for coming on board. She is exactly showing how weak her arguments are exactly on this point by shifting the blame on the author. What is funny about this little situation here is that the generation after Dante, his best reader, Giovanni Boccaccio, will call his own book, the Decameron, a book that is all about people meeting one another, falling in love, and then the camera pans onto the fireplace, as in 1950s movies. That's all that the Decameron is about, but he's saying, well, you can read this book if you want that way, and it will become a galeotto, will become a book that facilitates, erotic friendships. But that's not what it is. The book can, and you can, while reading the book, you can take that hermeneutic shift, okay? And this is even beyond the intentions of the author. I mean, the message, if there's one thing that I would like you to bring home with you about Dante and his ideas of poetry, is the following: that the meaning of poetry, like the meaning of every text, is not condemned to depend on the intention of the author. It's the reader's engagement with the text, in which you, as a reader, exercise your free will, is the point of literature. Thank you for the question. I have forgotten to articulate this point, and you just brought it up. Thank you. And you see that readers activate anything that's in the text, okay? It's your responsibility, by the way. Now, whatever book you read. I mean, Dante has learned this from Augustine. He learned it also from Ovid. The great poet, Roman poet, who was all about sex and love and so on. And Ovid had the other side of the argument. And he said, there's no sacred text that's so sacred that is beyond a bad interpretation, that is beyond a perverse interpretation. think how many matrons go to the temple of Jupiter, and when they're there, they think how many matrons have been made mothers by Jupiter. Okay, this is Ovid, and he says, well, there's nothing holier than a temple, and yet, when you walk into it and you want to see that, well, you're free to do that. Okay, okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.